Natural resources play a major role in Minnesota's identity as a state. Lakes, rivers, and streams are an abundant source of activity for thousands of people each year. Forests, prairies, and parks also provide lasting recreation and enjoyment. These and other resources can also be natural habitats for many species, all of which must be protected. Minnesota must balance habitat and recreation to preserve this environment for future generations. To do this, the state provides two primary funding sources, user fees and two constitutional amendments, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund and the Legacy Amendment. Each time you purchase a hunting or fishing license, for example, the money is used to help fund specific areas related to natural resources. Other fees collected help to fund other specified areas.
We have a number of user fees that will fund most of, at least our major environment and natural resources agencies. Some of the minor ones have a lot more general fund, but the major ones are all funded primarily through user fees, game and fish license fees, snowmobile registration, watercraft licensing, the DNR, and the Pollution Control Agency. You've got the fees for permits. We do have a fee on motor vehicle transfers where the money goes in there. That's a little bit more of a general one. Then also there's a tax on garbage that goes to the Pollution Control Agency. So those are primarily our major fee-driven agencies, our Department of Natural Resources and Pollution Control Agency.
The money generated by these fees is collected by the state and deposited into specific accounts.
Every 2 years, the legislature appropriates the money from those accounts. It acts just like it's appropriated similar to a general fund appropriation, only we specify which account it's coming out of. Like the Game and Fish Fund, all the fees for game and fish licenses are put into the one fund, and that fund is then appropriated for those activities, for the basic activities that the department does to regulate and to administer the game and fish laws in the state.
Voters approved an amendment to the state constitution in 1988 to help protect and enhance Minnesota's outdoors. The Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund is designed to supply long-term, consistent financial support for various aspects of the state's abundant natural resources.
Well, the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund was set up to kind of broaden our environment and natural resources, including increasing habitat, but it also has much broader implications. The state has funded a number of environmental education programs out of that, a number of studies that lead to improvements of the environment and natural resources in the state. It can be used for basically all environment and natural resources projects. It includes research, environmental education, things like that.
The Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund consists of state lottery proceeds and investment earnings. By law, the fund's balance cannot be spent. Only a percentage of the balance may be used each year on environment-related projects. It's the job of the Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources, the LCCMR, to decide where that percentage of lottery proceeds should be spent.
What happens is 40% of the net proceeds, after all payments are made, after all prizes are awarded, and all costs are subtracted, 40% of the net proceeds gets deposited into the trust fund. That's been building since 1989, and it's about $600 million today. And then what happens is, under the Constitution, 5.5% per year can be spent can be appropriated by law by the legislature. So currently, the LCCMR, or Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources, has the duty to make a recommendation to the legislature on how to spend that money. That will be a list of what they've determined to be the highest priority projects to fund, and the legislature can do as they will with it. Sometimes they've made changes, sometimes they haven't. But they will take those recommendations and then appropriate money from the trust fund as allowed under the Constitution. And then appropriate for specific projects. And there are a number of, sometimes they've had hundreds of projects that have come forward.
Once the LCCMR concludes its work, the legislature decides on the recommendations and begins work on legislation to appropriate funds to the proper agencies.
In 2008, the legislature passed another constitutional amendment to pass on to the voters to vote on that. That's the Legacy Amendment. What that does is provides an additional sales tax of 3/8 of 1% on the general sales tax, and that money then is divided up. 33% of that goes for the Outdoor Heritage Fund for habitat projects. 33% goes to the Clean Water Fund for clean water projects. 19.75% goes into the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund for arts and cultural heritage projects, which are not necessarily outdoor projects, but it is part of the legacy amendment. And then 14.25% goes toward the Park and Trail Fund, and that's used for basically to support parks and trails of a statewide or regional significance in the state. So that's important because a couple of factors. The first part with the Outdoor Heritage Fund, that's to try to get our habitat back to some level, a higher level that it's been. It's not to do the day-to-day DNR projects that are paid for the Game and Fish Fund or other funds, but to try to restore and increase habitat for wildlife in the state. Where in the Clean Water Fund, that's to try to restore some of our lakes, rivers, and waters and other waterways in the state. It's mostly to comply with federal requirements under the Clean Water Act. We have a lot of lakes, rivers, and streams in the state, and many of those are impaired. And under the Clean Waters Act, we have to recognize where those impairments are and have a plan to correct the impairment. And that's a major ordeal to comply with the Clean Water Act, and so that money is to help the state go down that road. The arts and cultural heritage, as the name implies, it's basically to improve arts and cultural heritage in the state. And then the Parks and Trails money, that's for support of our parks and trails in the state, those of statewide and regional significance is the way the Constitution reads. I think the key here is that we fund most of environment and natural resources through fees, the fee base, and that pays for the basic on-the-ground services. It doesn't pay necessarily for a lot of improvement to those activities, whereas with the two constitutional funds, the two constitutional amendments, they help to pay for some of the some of the improvements that need to be made and getting beyond kind of the day-to-day activities.
Enjoying the outdoors is a time-honored tradition in Minnesota. Consistent efforts to maintain and protect the state's environment and its natural inhabitants are critical to all future generations.